Summer of 2021, Arizona. The Phoenix metropolis trapped the daytime sun like a sponge, absorbing water, and then squeezed it back into the air as heat at night, never allowing it to cool down. I was suffocating. I'd lost my tech startup job in the big sick of 2020 and was now simply a manager for a store that sold teaching supplies. An expensive, useless degree taunting me from the top of my resume. Hiding from the heat and daydreaming, I got into watching Iditarod documentaries on YouTube. And that got me thinking about the Alaska wilderness in the winter, the dark and cold of it all. I could walk off into that frozen, snowy tundra and never return, I thought. The thought stuck. In pictures, I looked pretty happy. I took a monthly 3-day weekend to get out of the heat and go explore. I hiked and I paddleboarded and I made coasters out of resin. I was trying. But I was depressed enough that my dad offered to pay for a psychiatrist outside of my insurance. And I went. Did I tell you I've been crazy for a while? Anyways, I was prescribed a generic Zoloft. A few weeks in, the Alaskan summers seemed more appealing than the winters. I looked into it and got a job there, but that was a long way off. I ended up as a concierge in Colorado that winter, which came with cheap housing and a free ski pass that let me learn to snowboard on a Rockard Burton. It was spinny on the ice. You couldn't carve with it. And it would have been great in powder if I'd have known how to ride in powder. But that was my first season, and I didn't have it yet. It was Colorado to Alaska, and my first trip to Portland. I had already paid to ship my car to Alaska via ferry, and so all I had to do was spend a few nights in the back seat, and I'd be on my way. I wasn't a seasoned car lifer yet. I didn't really know any car lifers, and I wasn't aware of the apps and forums that help you find safe camping spots. So I kind of just picked a spot that I would sleep. In Portland. You guessed it. 3 a.m., the witching hour. I was awakened by a loud crash. And this next part I'm not proud of, but it took me several minutes to figure out what the crash was. So I was just sitting there, bolt upright, trying to figure out what happened when I realized that my front window had been smashed. I know now from some also unpleasant late night cup awakenings that I scream and freak out long before I am consciously awake. So I may have been awakened by the smashing of my front passenger window, but I might have just woken myself up with my loud screaming. On the bright side, my screaming and sitting up, even though I wasn't fully awake when I did, seems to have scared away the intruder. Oh, BeanDip's on top of the camera. It seemed to have scared away the intruder. So he was very gone by the time I was fully conscious. And he got away with a little pouch that included my meds, 6 months of my meds, more than I was supposed to have, because I didn't want to try to get them in Alaska. And my phone charger. Now, I imagine someone that would break into a car at 3 a.m. probably needs both of those. More than I did at the time. The ferry wouldn't ship my car with a broken window, so I had to push the ship date back. And in the meantime, I was driving around Oregon and Washington, frantically trying to figure out how I was going to find the parts and the labor to replace that window. I did find the parts and someone to help me replace it. It cost me about $300. And I got the car shipped, and I made my flight to Alaska in time. My new bosses had to drive me back to the airport like a week later, though, to get the car. Alaska was absolutely gorgeous and absolutely wet. I was in Seward, a coastal town in Resurrection Bay, and it started raining around the 4th of July, and it did not stop until I left Alaska. And I mean, it didn't stop for a second. There were clouds all day, every day, walking in the rain, hiking in the rain, working in the rain, talking to tourists about how bummed they are about the rain. I went through a whole bunch of pairs of quote-unquote waterproof shoes that ended up to not be so waterproof. And I felt like I never dried out, to the extent that I started growing mold on my back. Okay, not mold, fungus, ringworm. I stopped seeing those gorgeous views from the beginning of summer for the clouds, and frankly, I was getting tired of retail. So I got my first ski instructing job in New Mexico. I know that sounds strange, but Taos is actually one of the U.S.'s top ski schools. Highlighter yellow uniform notwithstanding. I pretty immediately learned that I was not the stellar skier, snowboarder that I thought I was. Ski instructor training will do that to you. But the training and the job itself made me an exponentially better rider on both. And I got to work with kids. This was my first time really interacting with kids, and honestly, it changed my life. I wanted to work with kids forever. On that theme, come summer, I picked a job nannying in Colorado. Fine, it was messier than that. I initially got a job working as essentially a camp counselor, but I didn't really vibe with the company culture, so I followed my crush at the time to Colorado, and because I didn't want to leave, I got a nannying job. That was the first season that I actually lived in my car, and it worked out super well. I was parking at these park and rides on the outside of town, and I could sleep there overnight, and there were so many places to hike. I also made really good money until August, when the family I was nannying for moved back to their winter home, and I embarked on another lonely shoulder season. My shoulder seasons, or in-between seasons, tend to be April and May and September and October, and I was feeling this one especially. I don't have a lot of friends when I'm between jobs, and I was getting really lonely. You guessed who came along. Yeah, this is when I got BeanDip. So, of course, my heart melted when in Flagstaff, Arizona, on a trip with my mom, I saw a little green cheek conure in a little glass box in a chain pet store. And I did not impulse buy that one. Instead, I researched for a month and set everything up, and then I bought BeanDip from a different chain pet store. We don't always have to be proud of our decisions, but we can at least admit that that's the unethical way we acquired our best friend. So I got BeanDip, and she was completely unaccustomed to human interaction or any kind of handling. And her wings were clipped, and I knew I wanted to free fly her. But that actually ended up being a little bit helpful. There's more on that in other videos. But yeah, anyways, I ended up taking her to North Carolina with me to visit a friend. I was still on shoulder season at that point, so I had time to socialize BeanDip on the trip there and the trip back, and further socialize her with the friend I was visiting. So by the time we got back to Arizona from North Carolina, BeanDip was a perfectly human habituated little baby. And that's it. That's how I became the crazy car life bird lady. If you want to hear more stories from after I got BeanDip, which include a ton of very expensive car troubles, then you should definitely comment below. If you enjoy this content and would like to get extra bonus content, please subscribe to my Patreon. It's only $2 a month. It's linked in the description. And if you want some stickers of birds or skiing, then you should check out my Redbubble page, which is also linked in the description. Thank you so much and have a great rest of your day.